Good evening. My name is Sarah Bentley Allred. I am the Director of Children and Family Ministries at St. John's Episcopal Church in Wake Forest, and this is Preparing for Holy Week with Children. Then Jesus said to them, "You will all become deserters because of me this night, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I am raised up, I will go ahead of you to Galilee." Peter said to him, "Though all become deserters because of you, I will never desert you." Jesus said to him, "Truly I tell you, this very night, before the cock crows, you will deny me 3 times. Peter said to him, "Even though I must die with you, I will not deny you." And so said all of the disciples. Then Jesus went with them to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, "Sit here a while. Sit here while I go over there and pray." He took with him Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee and began to be grieved and agitated. Then he said to them, "I am deeply grieved, even to death. Remain here and stay awake with me." And going a little further, he threw himself on the ground and prayed, "My Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me, yet not what I want, but what you want." Then he came to the disciples and found them sleeping. And he said to Peter, "So could you not stay awake with me 1 hour? Stay awake and pray, that you may not come into the time of trial. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak." Again, he went away for the 2nd time and prayed, "My Father, if this cannot pass unless I drink it, your will be done." Again, he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were very heavy. So leaving them again, he went away and prayed for the 3rd time, saying the same words. Then he came to the disciples and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and taking your rest? See, the hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Get up, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand." While he was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, arrived. With him was a large crowd with swords and clubs from the chief priests and the elders of the people. Now the betrayer had given them a sign, saying, "The one I will kiss is the man. Arrest him." At once he came up to Jesus and said, "Greetings, Rabbi," and kissed him. Jesus said to him, "Friend, do what you are here to do." Then they came and laid hands on Jesus and arrested him. Suddenly, one of those with Jesus put his hand on his sword, drew it, and struck the slave of the high priest, cutting off his ear. Then Jesus said to him, "Put your sword back into its place, for all who take the sword will perish by the sword. Do you think that I cannot appeal to my Father, and he will at once send me more than 12 legions of angels? But how then would the scriptures be fulfilled? Which is to say, it must happen this way." At that hour, Jesus said to the crowds, "Have you come out with swords and clubs to arrest me as though I were a bandit? Day after day, I sat in the temple teaching, and you did not arrest me. But all this has taken place so that the scriptures of the prophets may be fulfilled." Then all the disciples deserted him and fled. A few things that I think might come up if you were talking about this with children, and a few things that I might point out if I were talking about it with kids. So the first one is I think that kids would be really curious about the disciples and the denial and the desertion. And I think one thing that one could say about that is it shows that the disciples were truly shaken. Their faith was shaken, even though they were the closest friends of Jesus, the followers, and they had been warned. Jesus had warned the disciples that he would suffer and die, but their faith is still shaken, and that can demonstrate for us that human doubt is totally natural and it will happen. And you can extend out further if you've read further into the story and say that that's not the end of the story. They find faith again, and they go out into the world and share good news all over the world. So it is a season of doubt, and that can happen to all of us. It's very human. Secondly, even though the disciples deny him and desert him, Jesus says right from the very beginning of this passage in verse 32, I will go ahead of you to Galilee. So although they desert him, Jesus does not desert the disciples. He goes ahead of them to Galilee. Third, this passage in particular, maybe more than any other stories in the Bible, shows the complexity of Jesus. All of this emotion, it spans a wide range. So you have frustration and agitation and anxiety right alongside prayer and perseverance and obedience to the will of God. So that demonstrates the complexity of Jesus, and there's a lot that you can unpack there with kids. And the intertwinedness, I don't know if that's a word, of the human and the divine. So Jesus, in his prayer in the garden, is asking God a lot of questions, is questioning God, can this cup pass from me? And one way to look at that is that Jesus is asking God, is it possible that salvation can take place another way? Is it possible? And we don't have God, talking. It's a one-way conversation. We don't know exactly what God is saying back, but we can intuit from what happens next that the answer to that question was no, that this is the way that salvation must be worked out. So then, right up until the very end, Jesus remains a teacher, and he is caring for the ones that he loves right up until the very end, and especially the teachings of nonviolence. And I think it's interesting, one of the commentators that I was reading said that Jesus is preaching nonviolence, put away your sword, but this isn't it isn't giving in to powerful, oppressive forces, because Jesus knows what is going to happen eventually. The resurrection is the ultimate sign and symbol that death doesn't have the last word. Kingdoms of this world do not have the last word. And what remains is love. That is what remains in the end. So it's nonviolence, but not nonviolence that is simply oppression, I guess. And that's a little complicated, but maybe you could get into that. And then there is this thread running through of Jesus's obedience to God, and that is a sacrifice. So he has sort of the blood sacrifice, the suffering that takes place, but perhaps the even more important sacrifice, especially for us to remember, is the sacrifice of obedience to God and faithfulness. So, a couple of things for you to consider and perhaps talk about as a family. And thanks for being here. We'll see you next time.